tonight, the silver screen will bleed, and we're here to dissect every drop. Welcome to Fright Nightz, where we dive into the dark side of horror cinema and the minds behind it.
And welcome into another episode of Fright Nightz. It's been a while. I took a brief hiatus. I think the last episode went up in September, so we're a few months behind, but I am back here in the new year with a brand new episode. And for those of you that are new, Fright Nightz is a podcast where I sit down and talk to people from the horror community, whether it's actresses, actors, directors, filmmakers, or just horror superfans like myself. Playing the role of your host, it's me, as always, Kyle K-Dog, whichever you prefer. I'm not picky. And I'm very excited about this episode, the first one of 2026. And we're going to be sitting here talking to someone who is a first-time filmmaker, and it is a local film set in West Virginia. So please welcome into the show, Haley Hatcher.
Hi, I'm so glad to be here. It's a really big privilege to get to do the show, so I'm excited to see where it goes this evening.
I am very happy to have you on as well. And this has been another instance where we've gone through a few different dates and had to reschedule, whether it's weather, illness, stuff like that. But we finally locked it down, and you are my first guest of 2026.
I'm glad to be here. That's a big honor to at least be, the first one to start your new season. So I really appreciate you having me here.
And now I'm hoping I was correct in saying that this was your first attempt at filmmaking.
It was. You were absolutely correct at that. It was just something I jumped into, and we got it done. So yeah, it was the first thing. I've always been interested in film, of course, and stuff like that. But yep, it was my first project, and I really couldn't be more happier with it, honestly.
Now, before we get into the film, which I'll introduce later, I want to talk a little bit about you, especially with this being your first attempt at filmmaking. What exactly was it that made you want to go the horror direction as opposed to some other genre?
Honestly, I feel like you get some of the most interesting stories that stick out with horror. Whether it's, like sometimes you'll have stuff that's like, thriller-ish or whatever. It's not always about slasher. And I just feel like a lot of some of the most memorable things that you get out of cinema in a whole would come from the horror genre. So it's just one of those things. It's easy to kind of use your imagination on, and it's just a very big like outlet to do a lot of creativity. So it just kind of seemed like a no-brainer on that one. And I've always been a fan of horror, so that's kind of
I,
where it came from.
I can agree with that. I've always been a firm believer that a lot of the genres like action, romance, stuff like that, they're limited to the kind of stories they can tell. I feel
Hmm.
like horror, anything you can think of, you can find some way to
Yeah,
make it
you
spooky
can
or
take
scary or
anything. Yeah, absolutely. Anything you can turn into a horrific situation. So I think it leaves a lot of opportunity to just elaborate on.
So now, at what point in your life did you realize that you were a horror fan?
I think from very early on, I used to get called the weird kid. I would always have like the weirdest birthday cakes and, like Halloween masks when it wasn't Halloween, and just I've always been interested in the darker side of things, so to speak. So yeah,
I feel
it started early on.
I feel like that's how I've always been too. I mean, like I'm an adult now, and I'm still wearing
Yes,
horror shirts and stuff everywhere I go.
that's
And
me.
being in radio now, especially on a rock and metal station, I feel like that's the perfect catalyst to bring out a horror podcast and get to meet all these people that make the movies that I enjoy watching, especially because I'm a huge fan of indie films and like B tier stuff because with the major franchises, they've got this massive budget. You know it's going to be relatively decent whether the movie's bad or not. But with the indie stuff, it's always fun to see what people do with the budget they've got and the people they
Mhm.
do, and especially the local stuff. Like for those the people watching and listening, I got in touch with Haley through Mindy, MJ. Y'all have known each other for a while now, I believe, right?
She's been somebody that I've really looked up to for a long time, so it was truly an honor to get to work with her on this. She was very helpful with offering her music to me to use, so it was such a perfect setup, and I was, very fortunate to get the help from Mindy that I got.
Well, now it's time for the point that we were all looking forward to is to introduce the movie and kind of talk about the movie. This one's going to be tough for me because all of my past guests have been movies that have been out for at least a little bit. People have a number of people have watched them, so I wasn't as too worried about spoilers. So it's going to be tough for me not to spoil anything trying to talk about this film, but I've got it sitting here with me before I returned it to Mindy. She was nice enough to let me borrow it. If I can get it in the camera here without a glare, we've got
Oh, awesome.
is something burning, and it says some fires don't burn the forest, they burn the soul. And I love the imagery you've got on the case here. I don't know how you came up with that design or the look for it, but big fan of that. And I was also actually a big fan of the movie. I know with first attempts, people go into it thinking it's not going to be great. And I think that's what made this one great is I went into it thinking that it surpassed my expectations. And we'll talk about my opinions on it a little bit later. But I wanted to first ask you what how did you come up with the idea for Is Something Burning? Was it something that you've thought about for a while, something like a spur of the moment idea of like, oh, this would make a good movie, or how did you come up with the idea?
It was one of those things, I'll be honest, I kind of went round and round fleshing out the script for it. But once it was all said and done, and it took the process of it was probably between the writing and we had some issues recasting and just different things like that. But from start to finish, I would say it took about maybe a year to really hash out that final screenplay. And when it came down to the title of it, it was one of those things I never titled it until it was finished. So what ended up coming from that was one of the kids that actually is in the movie, like, the child actors. I was overhearing them talk one day and they were just talking about, titles for the movie and stuff like that. And I was like, they threw out that, oh, is something burning? And you wouldn't think that a kid could come up with that. They're like some fires burn the forest and the soul, like that sort of thing. And I was like, well, that's really good. So I kind of really just listened to what everyone around me was kind of, saying. And I was like, that's a good title. I'm the kind of person I think something should be catchy as far as like your artwork and your title because that's your first grab. So I was like, that's a good title. That would probably make me click on it at least to just read a little bit more about it. So it was kind of one of those things. It just kind of come from the script as far as the story, and it was breathed into life by a kid. So that's how I
That
did it.
I, kids say the
The
damnedest things
darndest
nowadays.
things.
That's but that was one of the things I noticed looking at the cover is the just if it was just Is Something Burning, that kind of leads people towards a certain direction of the
Hmm.
film, like, oh, there's going to be some sort of fire and stuff like that. But the caption of some fires burn down, don't burn the forest, they burn the soul.
Yeah.
Before watching the movie, it doesn't really mean anything. After watching the movie, you definitely understand what that means. And again, I'm really trying not to spoil anything here, but just taking a look at the next question, what was the process of you finding the cast members? Because I know it's a very local film set in
Hmm.
West Virginia. I know one of the scenes was in was it Patty's Diner?
Yeah, we actually shot in I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it's a diner up here in Princeton, West Virginia called
I remember, so I knew
Dolly's
it.
Diner.
Dolly's,
And
that's what it was.
hmm and we
I
did, and it's so great because a lot of, I'll be honest, since we're, on the show and we're here to talk,
Yeah.
um a lot of between us and the fans, of your show, a lot of what I did, I would do guerrilla filmmaking. I hate to
Okay.
say that, but I would just, kind of go taking that, James Cameron aspect of it and be like, well, if I can get in and shoot it and we get out before anybody says anything, we're good. So it was one of those things that we didn't actually talk to Dollies before we went in and did our scene. And then, of course, when it came time for it to be in fruition, we talked to them and we're like, hey, we did this. And they were more than happy to be part of it. And we listed them in the credits. So a lot of it in the beginning was just kind of not really knowing how to go about doing the filmmaking process. So we just kind of went in. I would tell my crew, hey, we're going to go here. We would kind of, so to speak, sneak in more or less and get our shots done and hightail it.
And that was one of the things like I before the little caption popped up that it was Dolly's. I was watching it and I'm like, well shit, I know that place because when me we part of what we do here at the Bear is we do broadcasts up at Southern Exposure. And I'm so used to every time I drive by it, seeing the big billboard for Dolly's up there on the side of the road. And I actually was like, you know what? Screw it. I'm gonna go in there and check it out one day. And
They're
I
great.
recognized it as soon as the scene started, and that's why one of the reasons I love this movie so much is because it is local. I mean, it's an hour,
Everything
hour and a
that
half or so down the road in West Virginia.
And honestly, some shots because I'm a native of, West Virginia. I grew up in
Hmm.
Pipestem and Lerona. Um, Childhood was spent in there between Princeton, but I actually live in, Rich Creek now, which is down in Virginia. And we took some shots from down here too. So it's kind of across the border. We've got the best of both of the Virginias working. So, it's both sides, so to speak. Um, as far as, like being in Virginia too. So, yeah.
And I think that's great because you don't see a lot of movies that are like set in this sort of area in the Virginia, West Virginia
Hmm.
region. It's always the more prominent places, like you get some in Richmond or stuff like that. You don't really see
Yeah.
anything here. That's why I thought one of the things why this movie I thought was great because it's local. I knew where it was. I've seen some of the places. But one of the other things I was wondering is like with it being so local, did that make it a challenge for casting, or were they people you knew beforehand, or how did that process work of finding those stars?
So the way I went about it, of course, when you're jumping into it, you always want to kind of give the people that you know a chance to be part of the journey with you. And it was kind of just one of those things. I actually my main characters I actually didn't know outside of the movie. I had started shooting a project before that kind of went into the ground a little bit. It kind of lost its way. But I was fortunate enough to meet our main actress, which was Carol. Through that last project, she had reached out to me. She, had an interest in doing the film and stuff. And so I met her on, the old project, and I was like, well, she was really good. Her kid was really good. So we brought them on to the new one. And as far as, the character for Mike and other people, they are people that I knew, and they were very generous to give me their time and do the acting and do their roles. And James was a fantastic character. He had experience in theater and things like that. And my main goal was to try to kind of find people close to the area because I'm very passionate about where we live. And I believe that, we deserve to be shown on the big screen too. So the more I could get local people involved, the better, because I know, we don't have a lot of opportunities being
Yeah.
in like a rural community. And so I thought, what better way than to get people involved in something that's really not quite ever come into fruition around here. We have a lot of people that make film and people that are coming in, like Kevin Sizemore, people like that who are natives. Um, but you just don't see a whole lot from like Mercer County and the little places around here. And so for me, it meant a lot to get people involved so that people and their kids had a thing to say, oh, we're proud. We
Yeah.
did something. We can see ourselves here now. So I kind
And
of
that
did it like that.
that kind of builds in because like I'm from a small town before I moved up here, way down in like South Hill, Virginia area, down near the border, and like the smaller areas I feel like have a lot more culture and community than the big cities because the big cities there's just so many people and
Yeah,
so much going on that you don't really get the culture part of it. And that's why like, I think doing a local thing is so great. But kind of circling back to the casting, that's one of the things that shocked me the most is you see a lot of these first time films or indie films where the acting is just god awful. Like
I
that's one of
agree.
the hardest things. Like the movie could be great, but then you hear some of the acting and you're like, what the fuck am I watching? Like
I
there's
agree.
really
Exactly. It's like this is terrible. Yeah.
and
Yeah,
like with
absolutely.
this, though, like the actors, they you said one of them or one or two of them had a theater background. They sounded like they had done this before. Like I said, it
They were
wasn't like
very organic and natural. And that was one of the very big strong points that I pushed because, like you, I enjoy watching the indie movies, but so many times you come across the dialogue, it's just completely, it sounds
yeah,
fake, like it's like, oh, that's scripted. And the way I kind of wrangled that situation, because where they hadn't had experience, I gave them the script, obviously, everybody had a script, but I made it a point to kind of drill into their brains, hey, I do not want you to recite me word for word. Just read
yeah.
this script. It's a roadmap. Tell me how you would get from point A to point B in your form. And just kind of did it like that. I never made anybody memorize lines or say anything specific. All they had to do was kind of read the script, get it in their mind, and take me where I needed to go, so to speak. So that's why we kind of did it that way to kind of combat that whole aspect of, people sounding fake. Because
Yeah.
I mean, acting, in my opinion, is simple reaction to something. So it's like, well, what would you do in this situation? So I kind of tried to beat that into them a little bit, and they really excelled. So,
Like I said, I think that's great because, like I said, it didn't seem forced or fake. They seemed like they were building off of each other, and that was one
hmm
of the impressive things. But kind of thinking back, like being a like a first time filmmaker, how did you go about the process of taking the idea, especially in such a small area that we live in, and turning it into an actual film?
I literally, when I was doing the script, I knew what we had around here, and I made sure to write around what I knew we could achieve, if that makes sense. I didn't come out and make up all these scenarios that would kind of be hard to fulfill. So what I kind of did for that was just look around at where we were and what we could use, and I worked with it in a sense, if that makes sense. I was like, well, I know I have access to this. I know I can get us here this day. And so it was really just kind of one of those things. I really did a lot of what I knew I could do the best of with what we had available, if that makes sense. I tried not to bite off more than I could chew, so to speak.
It does, and like another thing, like with it being so local, I feel like how big of a factor was budget in producing this for you? I know like it might not have been as expensive in the small area, but I've always been curious because you see on IMDb like when that's how I keep track of the movies I watch is like looking at
Mhm.
their budget. How big of a factor in like a first time filmmaking in like a very small area local venue, how much of a factor did the budget actually play?
It was a big one, honestly. You know, with this being the play, like the kind of community that it is, of course, we don't have a lot of money and stuff around here, but I financed the film myself, just kind of personally out of pocket. And, between us on the show and all of the viewers, this is the first time I've shared this. I shot the movie on a cell phone. So I
I
did.
could not tell.
Yeah, I used an iPhone. I had good audio equipment. Well, I mean, it's not the best, but I did take the time to really focus in on the sound and stuff because the way I feel, you can have a great movie, but when the sound's not there, you tune out of it. It
Yeah.
doesn't matter what's on the screen. You just, if you can't hear it, it's not any good. You could take a terrible image and show it, and as long as someone can hear it, they'll know what's going on. So in my mind, I was like, what I'm going to do, since I didn't have access at the time to a lot of film equipment and cameras and crews and stuff, I simply worked with what I had. I was like, I have this cell phone, I have these people, and we're going to get some audio equipment and make this happen. It was honestly just to see if it could be done, you
Yeah.
know. So, and it did. Like it actually ended up being a real thing, and that was very exciting to me. But I just simply worked with what I had, and I always tell anybody, you don't have to have the greatest camera to make something. It's just all about going out and doing it. So,
Now, before I jump into my next point, if my coworker Nathan is watching this right now, I want it to be known because he's got an Android, I've got an iPhone. We always argue about this. An iPhone can make a movie. That's all I want to say. That's argument closed
yes.
right there. But speaking of the next point, you mentioned that how important audio is, whether a picture or video could be bad. I completely agree. Like even if you get those movies where it's just nothing but jump cuts, the audio can make it seem
hmm
right. And like my first guest was the director of a film called The Devil's Vortex, and he had a lower budget, and there was a scene where they couldn't afford to have the visual effects of the person being run over. So right before it happened, it faded to black, and then in the background audio, you could hear the dunk dunk, like
hmm
hearing the tires. I'm like,
And
audio
you
is,
and you knew like
yeah,
that. I agree with that. it's one of those things they used to do it back in the old days as far as cinema goes, like Alfred Hitchcock times. It wasn't necessarily seeing the monster, it was just knowing what you knew
Yeah.
and having the environment to kind of cope inside, like, satiate the whole idea. So, I mean, like you said, you can take somebody without showing the gore and the graphics, and you give it that good audio treatment and build the idea around it enough, they're going to know what happened, and it
Yeah.
leaves the viewer to their own imagination. So
And now we talked a little bit about some of the process of being a first time filmmaker. Taking that knowledge and going into it, what was some of the biggest challenges making your first movie, or that you would say making any movie in general? What were some of the biggest challenges in Is Something Burning?
scheduling, that was the biggest issue we faced, was being able, where we all kind of, we're not professional actors, or we don't do that as our day job. So the biggest challenge we faced was literally being able to get everyone together in accordance to how we needed to shoot. So a lot of it was just simply trying to navigate work schedules and who could be then, like, there and where, and at the certain times. And so that was our biggest challenge. And that is the truth. Like, our biggest challenge was just being able to schedule enough time to get the whole project finished. And I do think that if we had been, you know, as our day jobs like professional filmmakers, we could have probably knocked it out in, maybe like 6 months to a year. But where we were just kind of living our lives and having to, deal with family stuff and jobs and the everyday 9 to 5 grind, we would have to get together when we could to shoot. And so that kind of caused the project to go on a lot longer than I would have preferred, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But that was the biggest challenge, was just getting in a position to where you could take the time to work on the movie, if that makes sense.
It does. And you might have mentioned this before, but how long in total did it take from like the starting point until you had a finished film ready to go? How long was that
S-
process for you?
So from the time of post-production up into filming and, pre-production, we I'm going to be honest, it took about close to 3 years,
Okay.
which is a long time in the film world. I mean, it really is. But with that being said, that's us getting together when we could, trying to keep things. And another thing with that, obviously the schedule challenging, it was keeping continuity good, because, you might go, we used to go maybe sometimes 2 to 3 or 4 months between shoots. And so we would always have to keep the hair in check. We would have to make sure everybody looked the
Yeah.
same. And it really, with that being said, I feel like looking back when I see the film, there might be certain signs that, you could tell it wasn't all shot at one time, but looking back, I mean, you really couldn't, in my opinion, like, with the continuity and stuff, like, I feel like we really, all things considered, managed to pull that together, at least enough to seem like it was seamless, but it wasn't. Not at all. It was very hard.
And kind of moving on to like the again, really try not to spoil anything, but the plot of the film. I know a lot of people hate the idea that a horror movie is going to be like a slow burn kind of start. And this one, I would say it was a slow burn, but the character development and the interactions before any of the actual horror elements became a factor, I think that was done really well. Like the arguments between the two stars, the way it affected the child, that kind of stuff. Like that kind of emotional energy and commitment, I feel like makes a slow burn more acceptable. You get some where it's like 45 minutes into the movie before anything happens and you just want to turn it off before getting to the end of it. But I think that was one of the things y'all did really well is you added the elements with the actors and the situations before anything actually got scary or spooky, and I think you did it well.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. And it means a whole lot to me that you took the time to watch the film. That's honestly, at the end of the day, the whole reason I ever made it was just for people to be able to see it. So I appreciate that more than you could ever know.
So I actually watched it before we set the first date, and then that date didn't actually happen. So then a few weeks later, we get to today. So last night when I got off work, I went home and rewatched it again. That way, I'm like, I wanted to make sure I've got everything. I don't want to miss anything. But I mean, I even after just only a few weeks in between, it was still like I still noticed things that I didn't catch on to the first time. And I mean, the plot twist, again, not trying to spoil anything, the plot twist at the end, still, I mean, I got so fixated on the beginning of the movie the second time that I completely forgot about it until we got to the end.
That's awesome. That was one of the biggest things going into it. I kind of wanted it to be one of those films that you could watch the first go around, see the twist of it, and then when you went back, if anybody ever did take the time to go back and give it a second watch, it would be right there, kind of. Like you
Yeah.
could kind of see the lead up to what it was. Like it's almost like it's one way when you watch it the first time, and then knowing what you know and go back and watch it, you can kind of see it unfolding a little better. So,
Going back to the plot twist a little bit, was it from the beginning? Was that how you wanted it to go, or were there some changes in how you wanted it to finally reveal near the end of the movie, or was that just always this is how it's going to happen and it just stayed that way?
so I always knew my ending before I ever went in to the whole process. I knew what I wanted as the ending, and for me, it was kind of a way to write towards it. And we did end up into some hurdles and things, and there were things that had to be changed to get us there. If I would have had it my way, there were several scenes that we had written out, and we just unfortunately didn't get the chance to really do it based on, back what we were talking about with the scheduling and things like that. So what I did when I knew things weren't going to work, but I knew I wanted the ending I wanted, I had to kind of write around it and be like, well, here's what we can do to get there. So I mean, in a way, yes, the idea changed, but I always knew what the outcome would be, if that makes
Okay,
sense.
it does. And I've been wanting to bring it up too. I see your background there is the Rotten Moxie Productions.
Yeah.
Is that something is that something you created? Is that someone you work with or what? Tell us a little bit more about Rotten Moxie.
I'm Rotten Moxie for as for now. I've been trying to work towards, building up, people that have the same interests that I do, just people that are creative and looking to do projects and just things like that. And so I was like, I'm just going to start my own little thing. And so back in 2022, I did my little production thing. That's when I first started writing movie scripts and things like that. I've always been a fan, but I really zeroed in on it around 2022. And it's just kind of went from there. I started out, I was like, I know I want the company to be called Rotten Moxie. But as of now, it's really just me. And then I do work with certain people that I find, as far as, um, like, with the movie and such. And right now I'm actually working towards trying to release an animated series. So it's me and I go and find people essentially. Yeah.
So how did the name come to be, Rotten Moxie? Is that where did that name come from?
So I loved the word moxie always. It means you have a lot of gumption, get up, do. And I'm not the nicest, I feel like I'm a little bit, not the clean cut kind of person. So it just kind of fit, rotten moxie. So it was just something I kind of made up based on the word moxie. And I was like, I'm a production company, so it just kind of flowed. And I was like, I'm
Yeah,
gonna use that.
yeah, because when I had asked Mindy what email for me to send the Zoom link to, and she said it was Rotten Moxie Productions at gmail.com. I'm like, that's a badass name. That's
Thank you.
and now it makes sense because I mean, like it fits the theme of the movie and it fits what you're trying to do. And we talked about some of the struggles into being a first time filmmaker, but on the opposite side of that, what were some of the like the most memorable moments you had throughout the process, the most fun you've had? Let's take a look at the more cheerful
Positive
and
thing.
positive
Yeah.
side of filmmaking.
Honestly, all the negative things that we kind of discussed, that can go out the window because the overall experience of just getting to be able to film something and do something that not a lot of people really take the chance on, whether it's not they are interested in it or they just don't think they can. It just meant a lot to be able to prove that, it is possible. You can make a movie if you really want to. And I mean, we had so many good times. Like it was so fulfilling. Just, you'd film a good scene, everybody did great. Just the whole energy every time we would get together was so rewarding. The struggles aside, everybody was more than willing to cooperate and did the best that they could when we got together. And it was just, you know, from the start to finish, being able to look at your script once it's printed off and being like, all right, here's a script. I finally made a script. And then, you start shooting and then you start putting it together. And it's like the whole process of it is super rewarding. And it's just, there's always going to be challenges, but at the end of the day, getting to see what you put together is the biggest reward. Like I would always feel so rewarded every time I would, end a shoot and come back and dump the footage and start editing it because I edited it and stuff myself.
Yeah.
um it was like chef's kiss to see these good takes and be like, oh, that works so well. And it was just the whole process of it is rewarding. I mean, if you can overcome the challenges, which they're not fun, but the reward is it's excellent. Like I couldn't ever imagine not making another project regardless of bad things that happen. It's just wonderful. So
And that's one of those things, like all the people I've talked to on Friday night so far, whether it was actors, actresses, directors, stuff like that, they've always talked about how it doesn't matter because things are going to go wrong in any film. He's like, but they
mhm,
said as long as the positives outweigh what went wrong, they
mhm,
consider it a success. And I
yeah.
think that's a great way to do it. But I always try, like, especially from because I get so many different perspectives from the horror community when through Fright Nights, that I always think it's fun to get to see the ups and downs of the process and from different people's perspectives. So I think, like, yeah, I think the way y'all did it and what the end result was way beyond what I expected, being a first time film.
Thank you. That means so much to me to hear that. I really appreciate that.
Now, before we get into the nitty gritty of the film, like about release dates and stuff like that, I do want to bring up. I've noticed, really in horror and like just filmmaking in general, a lot of it's really a male dominated process. So I was kind of curious about the female approach to filmmaking and stuff like that. Was there extra pressure added onto it, knowing that you were going into this, or were there other female influences making this film, or what was kind of the process for that?
You know, I think it's great that you asked that question. Um, I never actually felt any kind of, pressure as far as like, oh, I have to, be better than a man or like any of that stuff. Um, but it's true, like, it's a male dominated world. And I hate to say, I think sometimes like just maybe girls don't want to do that kind of thing, maybe, but it's almost like, there's so many like really good female producers and a lot of good female casting directors. And I think as far as the production aspect goes, I wouldn't even argue. I mean, I wish I had a good answer because I mean, I'm not a professional, but I would like to think that if a woman came out with a good enough idea that they'd give her a chance, you know?
Yeah.
Um, and it's just one of those things I feel like sometimes, you see a lot of really good female motivated films. They're just very few and far between because I just don't think there's as many girls out here doing that as boys, and that's one thing. Like if nothing else, I mean, I'm totally equalized with boys and girls, um, and it's like, but I do wish sometimes that girls would know that there is a place for them to do production and stuff like
Yeah.
that. It does get hard and it gets very, you know, testy as far as female stuff goes with film world, but it's just one of those things. I feel like, a good idea is a good idea. And I would like to think that it would be treated the same between either one, if that makes sense. Um,
I completely agree. I've always thought that, like, if like I never thought that there was like some type of competition environment or
mhm.
whatnot. And I've just always been curious because I wasn't going to be the one to make assumptions about why there weren't as many more prominent women producers and filmmakers and stuff like that. But I always just been curious from a female filmmaker's perspective, how that the mindset behind that would work, or other stuff like that.
Yeah. See, to me, it's just kind of one of those things. I'm the kind of person, and I can't speak for every female, but I'm the kind of person that, if you have a good story, it deserves to be told. And I don't think you can genderize that, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And so, unfortunately, I can't speak on how things are done in Hollywood and the big production world. But I would like to think that anybody who's taken the time to put the work in would get fair recognition. Um, I don't know if that's so true or not. I mean, I would like to think so, but then again, I just the best we can do is like if you're wanting to do something, do the best that you can and just try kind of because you never really know. So it's just one of those things that I really don't know, but I feel like it would be fair if people had good ideas.
No, I think that's a great answer. And like we're gonna kind of circle back to the movie now. Like I said, the way I keep track of movies I've seen and have watched is I rate them on IMDb. And it has been frustrating the hell out of me that I haven't been able to rate this movie yet because it says it's still in production. I was curious, and for the people viewing, watching, and listening right now, um, what is your estimated release date for the film? And when it does release, what is the format that people will be able to check it out?
So what my plan is, and it was actually something I'm glad that I got to do your show this evening, because I wanted to kind of make a little bit more of a public release. We had our premiere in November at a local theater. It was a little drive-in theater. Well, it's
Hmm.
not little, but it was a drive-in theater, and it was great time. And my plan was after the first of the year, once we could get our paperwork and stuff like that in order to kind of try to submit it to be distributed. Like I had been kind of networking with a couple of different companies that try to put stuff onto streaming sites, if that makes sense.
Okay.
Um, so I was planning on going that route. But then I kind of thought about it and I was like, I don't know how long that will take. And so what I wanted to kind of do is just kind of gauge attention in on it. And I thought about maybe possibly just putting it on YouTube just for people to kind of see it. Because at the end of the day, that's my main goal. It's not about, getting money or
Yeah.
anything crazy. I just want people, especially around here, to be able to see it. And if nothing else, get inspired to say, hey, I can do this too, you know? And so that's kind of my goal. I would like to get it distributed. Um, but unfortunately, we're kind of going back and forth with paperwork stuff. So it's one of those things like worst case scenario, if I don't get that option, then I'm just gonna make it public for everyone to be able to enjoy. And hopefully word of mouth will share it. And if nothing else, I would love to use this as a way to just show, like I said, people, you can do this and maybe build off of it, maybe make a whole other movie, just use it kind of as a platform. Um, but that's also kind of like you said, one of the challenges. It's been kind of challenging to figure out the ropes of after you've made it because a lot of
Yeah.
times you're not really thinking about it. You're thinking about getting the movie done and you finished and then it's one of those things if I could ever tell another filmmaker what not to do, I really feel like when you first start a film, you should definitely figure out what the intent is at the end as far as marketing and where you're going to put it, if that makes
Yeah.
sense. So that's the biggest piece of advice I could give to anyone is if you're going to make something, know where it's going. So,
I know. I definitely, if you've still got some physical copies, I'll have to get me one for my personal collection because
oh, for
in
sure.
in 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 my apartment, my entire living room is horror themed. I've got figures, portraits, posters, all that sort of
That's
stuff. So I would
awesome.
love to have a copy of Is Something Burning in my own personal collection.
Absolutely. And one thing I will say, we did like I did the DVDs and stuff myself and we all know that, you can only go so far quality
Yeah.
wise when it comes down to a DVD, but I would like to make the movie digital to where people could go and watch it outside of the disc because I'll be honest, the way it was done, if you had one of those really old TVs that had the built-in DVD player, you could pop that in it looks great, you know. But when you're watching the DVD copy on, like a high definition TV, it kind of comes across as fuzzy. And that's why I really wanted to make two different like versions available, because if you watch it, digitally, it's that all that's gone. It's very crisp, very, clear. And so I wanted people to have the chance who couldn't get their hands on a disc to at least be able to go somewhere and watch it, and it be something they could stream on their TV. It's a great movie on the phone. That's all good, but I wanted people to be able to watch it in comfort, kind of. So
Yeah.
we have different versions of it. That the disc copy, it's not the greatest copy. It's a DVD at the end of the day, but the digital version, it kind of takes away from some of that, like fun, like just and I wanted to make that available to people so that they could see it the kind of the way it was meant to be shown. But like I say, if you have an old TV, it's going to look great on it.
Well, that's just always been one of my things. Is I've always been a bigger fan of like having a physical copy, whether it's books,
Yeah,
movies, stuff like that.
me
So like
too.
these newer movies that come out, I'll stream them first, and then if I really like the movie, I go out and buy myself a copy for my collection. That way,
Same.
down the line, I can just pop it in the PS5, play it on the TV.
Hmm.
But no, I'd definitely love to get me a copy. But one of the other things I want to talk about before we get into what I say the fun wrap up portion is you mentioned earlier that was your one piece of advice of the don'ts in first time filmmaking. From your experience with Is Something Burning, what is some advice that if people watching the episode or listening want to get into filmmaking, want to do that first film, what's some advice you would give them on how to get started, like the do's and don'ts, or just some overall general advice to kind of
Just
help them
kind of,
get underway?
you know, the best thing to do is to just, if you're very interested in that, we kind of, everybody has a phone, so a lot of people that I've seen first time filmmakers, they get hung up on that aspect of, oh, well, I don't have a cinema camera or a film
Yeah.
camera or any of this stuff. And it kind of goes back to, you've got to use what you have. At the end of the day, if you have a good idea and a good story, you can take certain things and work them to your advantage. Don't let yourself be limited by what you don't have. Look at what you do have and use it and work with it. Everyone has a cell phone. They're all good quality cameras now for the most part. you know um Everyone, probably has people that they know. And so a lot of it is just taking what you have, if that's what your passion is, and using it to your advantage, more or less, like be like, hey, this is what I can do. I have this. And even if it's just a 10-minute idea, that's better than just sitting and wondering whether or not you could have done it. So it's one of those things. The best way to go about it is to don't dip your toes in the water, jump right in and do what you can if that's what you enjoy, because you'll feel better for it. So,
I think that is the perfect answer for that question. And I always do this with my guests, whether it's a new film or a film that's been out for a while, because you guys will know it better than I will. Without spoiling it, how would you describe to the people watching and listening the what is something burning? What is the film?
so is something burning? If I could sum it up in very few lines, I would say, you know, a mother's child, we have a family. Um, a, a, a mother's child disappears into the forest after a situation that unfolded, and he just doesn't come back quite the same.
I
That's
that
very
I
Pet Cemetery-ish.
if I would have tried to have done that, I definitely would have spoiled something. So that is better than I could have imagined for that. And like I said, it's something burning. I mean, it's full of plot twists. It's full of suspense, whether it's the intended horror suspense or not. So if you get the chance to check it out when it is available, make sure you do. And Haley, I do want to ask you, is there you mentioned you had you're working on an animated project.
Hmm.
So if you could tell us a little bit about that and any other possible prospects you've got coming up here in the near future.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm working right now on an animated series. I started it actually around November. And it's funny because that's when we premiered as Something Burning. But we started it around then, and it's one of those things I've kind of just took over on my own. So I'm working with a totally different crew now. Um, I wish there would be familiar faces on this one, but I don't think that's going to be a thing. So what I'm doing now, I kind of took a step back from shooting, so to speak, and so I have uh, started an animated series. It's going to be kind of like Tales from the Crypt in a way,
Okay.
and it's going to be set in an Appalachian scenario, and pretty much the whole narrative of the show is going to be, you know, kind of like Tales from the Crypt. I love a good anthology type story like Creep Show and stuff like that. So I was like, what better way than to revisit the animated series of Tales from the Crypt, have the host, have each episode be a really good spooky story, wrap it up, and that's kind of what I'm working on right now in between my next actual live action feature. I'm currently kind of like, tossing ideas back and forth for a script, but what I'd planned to do was kind of to release that just to keep everybody having something to watch, and while I'm writing my script, just kind of let them watch the animated series, and I hope that it goes well. I'm working with an excellent group of people. I have fantastic voice actors. I couldn't be more pleased with what we have going so far. Um,
I've heard rumors that you're talking to Mindy about voice acting in this
yes,
animated series.
absolutely.
She is very excited. She's talked about it multiple times with me, and
Great,
that's one of those
because
things I'll have to check out too. And I feel like she'd be great for that.
you would too. I mean, you're already a radio station voice. I mean, it's one of those things like it's a lot more as far as what I've observed with what I've been working on so far. It tends to be it. I've had a lot more laid back process with this than when it came down to, filming a live action film. And I feel like, it's more easygoing. It's fun. It's one of these things where, if you have a free time in the evening and you want to kind of like, jump into the idea of voice acting, it's something easy that someone could do. I kind of did that based on what we had talked about with scheduling and stuff. And I know with what, people hear and everything, if you don't have professional actors, it's one of those things that you want to make people have a convenient time to be able to work. And so I'm working with actual voice actors now, but I would never be opposed to letting anyone around here who wanted to take the time and be part of it. All they'd have to do is ask me, and
Well,
I'd totally let them in on it.
well,
So,
we can get in touch in the future because that's always been something I've wanted to do is try voice acting. So I mean, especially a local thing, like we can
mhm.
talk about that
And
off
it's so
episode.
easy
But
because you can just kind of like network back and forth. You don't have to be together in person, none of
yeah,
that. So it's easier.
so we've got that. Like you said, you a possible next feature film. Do you have any idea about what kind of vibe that's going to be,
I'm
or
playing
is that still hush hush under the wraps type thing?
I can give you a little bit of detail. And like I say, with me saying this, I'm not going to tell y'all it won't change. But for now, I'm kind of trying to zero in on character development a little bit more than I did in the first movie. So I kind of want to really take what I didn't do that I wanted to do in the first movie and kind of elaborate on it with this one. And so I have a pretty good idea of where I'm going to go from for the ending. I'm the kind of person I always know where I'm going to end, and it's like, well, how can I get there? So, um, I've been thinking, I always like to keep that aspect of horror in it, whether it's like, slasher or gore or whatever. But um, I want to try to do like a thriller type movie, maybe something that just goes a little bit bigger than what is something burning is. Like that's my plan is to kind of everything I do just kind of make it a little bit bigger and better.
Okay.
And so it's still going to be scary, it's going to be a little bit more drama. There's going to be a lot more character development, and I feel like maybe um I don't know for sure if it'll be set in Princeton either. So it's one of those things, it's just having to work with what you can, and I'm thinking about doing some different things, but it's not completely hashed out yet. But I do plan to have another movie in the works by at least a year from now. So
Well, I will look forward to that. And then one last thing before we get into my rapid fire questions segment. For those that want to follow you or Rotten Moxie Productions, where can they find you to kind of keep up to date on stuff you're working on? Or if they want to see, is something burning, how they can keep track of like where it'll be available, how they can access it, how would be the best way for them to follow you?
So the best way to follow, I do a lot on YouTube. We have a TikTok as well. I say we, it's me. I have a TikTok as well. Anything, if you type in Rotten Moxie, it'll be there. Facebook, I know that's kind of an older platform as far as that goes. But we do still have a Facebook, and I'm trying to work to get a little bit better at being active on social media because that's also been a struggle. I'm
Yeah.
not the most active person on social media.
I'm one of those two. I
So,
hate going on social media
uh,
just
yeah, it's a
because you never
drain.
know what's going to pop up. So I mean, I
Right.
completely understand that.
And that's one of those things I'm like, gosh, I just wish I had somebody to to post for me. And that's, I guess, kind of what I'm trying to do is be on social media a little bit more. But we do have a Facebook page under Rotten Moxie. Right now we have a YouTube, same name, and then the TikTok. And I'm wanting to work towards getting an Instagram and all that stuff. And I'm sure I will, but my goal is to try to find someone that would be interested in doing that because I'm so bad at getting on and updating people and doing that. So I really feel like I could really use help in that department.
So now
So
when we upload this episode to our YouTube and Facebook, I think we're shooting for the 29th. We'll make sure to put links to the
thank
YouTube and the
you.
TikToks for that as well. That way people can give you a following and kind of keep up to date on what's going on with you guys. And um, when you do finally release Is Something Burning on whatever format, we'll make sure we post something on the socials as well to kind of boost it, be like, hey, it's out now. I'll go make sure you go check it out.
Awesome. I couldn't thank you enough for that because the more people that can know it exists, the better. Even if you don't like it, just watch it and that's still a view. So any publicity is good publicity as far as I'm concerned. That's the whole reason I ever made it was just to let people see it and know that it's possible, kind of like, hey, we might live in a small town, but that doesn't matter if you really want to do something.
Yeah.
So
So now we've done the business part of the Fright Nights episode. Now it's time to have a little bit of fun before we wrap things up. I always like to do I used to call it rapid fire, but a lot of these, even for me today, requires a lot of thought to answer these questions. So it's going to be a rapid fire
a
questionnaire.
slow shooting.
Yeah, I'll ask some questions based on horror. You give me your answer, I'll tell you mine, and then we'll go through a number of those. I always go into it having a set number of questions, but by the time we get to the end of the episode, I've had so much fun that I completely forget how many I had or what they were. So I'm off the dome. I'm just gonna throw some questions out there and see what you think. And if you're ready, we'll get into it.
Sure.
So my first one is always your favorite horror movie of all time.
The Exorcist.
The Exorcist.
Yes, absolutely.
Mine, if you can't tell, is Devil's
Is it?
Rejects.
Oh,
I
hey, that fantastic movie. I
I
love that as
I
well.
I love that whole trilogy, but Devil's Rejects is always one of those. You don't find horror movies often where you fall in love with the bad guys.
Mhm. Exactly. And I tell you, that was such a iconic character building as far as that goes, the cast and stuff. Like we all know that movie.
Yeah.
And so like it really stood the test of time as far as being part of the genre and what it delivered. So
And now we're going to second question, taking it up a little bit notch. We've got your favorite horror franchise.
here lately, I've been very interested with A24. I think they're a pretty interesting production company. Not everything they put out I like. Back in the day, though, when they were first getting started a couple of years ago, Chef's Kiss, excellent stuff. And I really liked New Line Cinema. Like,
Yeah.
and I know that kind of went out the window, but as far as like who I think is doing good horror and stuff like that production wise, um, like I say, not everything A24 is putting out now is the best, but I think that's what's leading us at the moment. I don't want to say unfortunately, but that's a pretty big one. Um, but as far as, a favorite company, I like to kind of just find people on Reddit who have made something, and then you go and watch it, and it's like, wow, that's really scary. How strange that it's never been picked up. So I like if I had to choose like a genuine production company that I'm fascinated with, it would be MGM because they were
Okay.
so mean to their actors and
So
actresses.
so
It
for
was
me,
like,
I mine's for a whole different reason. I've always been a huge fan of Trauma. Just
yeah,
because they're not intended to be good movies. They're just intended to be stupidly gory for no good reason.
yes.
And
I didn't
I
even think to say that. Like people like especially like back with like people like Lucio Fulci
yeah.
and Zombie. Yes,
Like I every now
absolutely.
and then I love just sitting and watching a brain-numbing gore
Yeah,
fest just for the hell of it.
absolutely. Uh-huh.
A close
And
second for me though is Asylum, just because of their parody
yeah,
films and how they can still make something that was originally not creepy really
yeah.
weird.
I like gosh, I can't think of the name off the top of my head, but they put out a lot of they go back and do a lot of redos. Is it Shock Factory? Possibly
I
something
know
like
that
that.
name. It might
Hmm.
be.
But they'll go and just take a lot of those B movies and
Hmm.
really remarket them to where it's like a hit in a way, like Night of the Demons 2 and just stuff like that. I love stuff like that. The kind of movies that you could go through the old school video stores and look at the box art and be like, wow,
Yeah.
that's really scary. Let me grab it.
Another one that's always I never remember the name, but it's the people that are doing the Disney spinoffs. Like you've got the Blood and Honey, Winnie the Pooh.
Yeah, yeah, like the
I
blood. I
actually
did
had
actually saw that.
I actually had Craig Dowsett, who played the original Winnie the Pooh in that first movie, on as a
That's
guest not too long
awesome.
ago.
That is so awesome because I saw the original and honestly the whole reason I watched it is because the whole idea of it was interesting.
Yeah.
Who would ever think to take Winnie the Pooh and do that? And I don't know if you actually had ever seen it or not, but they did the same thing once Steamboat Mickey became
Yeah,
public domain
they did.
and they
And
did it.
that's what I love about these guys is they're taking all these Disney
Yeah.
movies, like they did a Bambi one, they've done Peter Pan.
Yeah.
They're having they're calling it the Pooniverse, which the name's a little shaky, but and I think sometime this year they're planning to do like a Avengers Endgame style movie where
I would want
they're bringing
yeah,
them all in as one big group.
that
I'm
would
like
be awesome.
I was
See,
like
that's
I just don't see how people think of this. Like how can I make
yeah,
Winnie the Pooh scary? That's
scary. And it's just so funny because it's like, that to me is very much an original idea. I mean, I know that of course, Winnie the Pooh existed, but it's like you said, who would think to be like, oh, hey, let's make this scary?
yeah.
Like, and it works. So,
And like there's been people making Popeye horror films and stuff like that. I'm
yeah.
like, it's wild what people come up with.
Hmm.
But see, this is why I said it's no longer rapid fire questions because we went way off the rails on question two. Moving back into the third question, your favorite trilogy.
My favorite trilogy.
Mine is the Terrifier trilogy. They're coming out with number four this year, so it won't be a trilogy anymore. But for now,
If I had to choose, probably a favorite trilogy, and it's going to come across as very like, you know, uh, obvious, like not obvious, but just like basic. Um, I really, really like the first three Nightmare Before Elm Streets and Texas Chainsaws. I know, like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre too. It was a wild ride. It had some of the people from,
yeah,
you know,
the
uh,
subterranean environment they
yeah,
had and all. Yeah,
it's hard. I think it's very hard to find a trilogy that each movie is great in. You
Yeah.
know what I mean? So the ones I can think of that I know are that I would sit through each three movies would definitely be the Chainsaws and the Nightmare Before Elm Streets because they were
That
just
that that's one of the
different.
things that's always been hard for me to understand is like you get these franchises where the first three movies are really good,
Hmm.
and then after that they just get so bad.
Yeah, it's one of those things like I feel like sometimes it's best to let something die with dignity.
Yeah.
A lot of times you don't have that. So
It's like I recently watched the first Corpse Grinder movie,
I've never seen that. I don't even
and
know. I don't think I've heard of that.
the whole premise is this cat food company starts running low on money, so they start taking cadavers, grinding them that into meat for the cat food, and it gives the cats a taste for human flesh. So they start attacking their owners, and but then I think it was 12 years later they made a sequel, which
Wow.
was cat aliens from another planet coming to Earth and trying to take over. I'm like, why? There was no need to redo this movie.
Right.
None.
Like that's actually that sounds like an interesting concept. That's something I'm literally going to go and look up after this podcast because I would definitely watch the first one because you that's just wild. So
I think the first one was from 1971 was the year it came
really,
out.
that's crazy. I'm gonna have to look into this because I've never heard of it. So I have to know.
Moving on next, like I said, just pulling them from the top of the head now is favorite killer.
Favorite killer. I like Hannibal Lecter and Michael Myers.
Okay.
Yeah, I think Hannibal Lecter, he's not what you would think of as far as a slasher killer, but his story as far as all the people that he ate with cannibalism, that to me was like, oh wow, that's kind of weird. And then of course, Michael Myers, the shape.
Yeah.
He was great. Um, I liked him. Uh, but my favorite, like killer wise, probably thinking about it, I love for as far as my favorite slasher movie, which would probably could be a favorite killer. I love the Scream series,
Yeah.
Ghostface. He's good. Well,
That that's
they're good.
that's always been one of the things for me is I have always much more appreciated the killers that have a sense of humor.
Yeah.
And you get that a lot with Freddy, Ghostface, but the one I
Mhm.
think does it best is Art the Clown because he has so much humor to him without ever saying a word in any of the movies. He never speaks, but it's just his
It's his
reactions. Yeah,
mannerisms and just the way he does. Yeah. He's honestly, if you think about characters that have been developed within like the past 10 to 15 years, he's the most iconic. You see him everywhere. And
yeah,
that started, of course, I'm sure is like it was totally indie, stuff like that. So to see that come as far as it did, that's a big inspiration,
yeah. Especially because he
So
originated in All Hallows Eve, which was
yeah, just a simple
yeah,
like anthology type movie, like just,
and
a
people
simple
loved him so much. Kind of like The Jester. They made a feature length movie about that, and he originated in an anthology as well. It's just people
yeah.
fall in love with these characters, and they're like, oh, we can do something with this.
Hmm.
All right, so next we're gonna go with the most disturbing scene in a horror movie.
I would probably say the worst scene in a horror movie that I kind of was like, okay, that's a lot, and I would turn. I would say, and I don't watch a whole lot of stuff like that, so this is probably going to sound very tame and mild, but I remember I went down a rabbit hole of watching, like stuff like Cannibal Holocaust and like the Human Centipede and stuff like that. But what got me was probably, I want to say it was the Human Centipede too, when the woman was giving birth to the
Yeah.
child, and it just like, okay, it went under the gas pedal, boom. Like that was a little weird. Um, like of course the turtles and stuff like the animals that I try to stay away from stuff like that because I'm a huge animal fan and I'm like, that's a little much. But I thought the Human Centipede thing was rough, and then um There's a lot though. I mean, you could really sit and dissect that for a really long time. I mean, right down from like Hereditary to like the head
Yeah.
being in the road, and not to give out spoilers, but just different stuff like that. I mean, there's a lot nowadays that it's very much like, oh,
So the two for me that stood out, and I'm only saying these because they came out of nowhere. The movie, like you get stuff like Terrifier, where you know the movie's going to be gory, there's going to be disturbing stuff. The two that for me is the first Silent Hill, because it was
yeah.
kind of tame. You had like the tortured souls, but when Pinhead grabbed the woman by her chest and just yanked the skin off, I'm like, oh, wow, that's.
It's a little rough, yeah.
And then the other was in a Bone Tomahawk.
I've heard of Bone Tomahawk. It's
There's
one
a
of the movies
scene
I've wanted to see, and I haven't got the chance to watch it.
there's a scene that's kind of like what happened in Terrifier 1. Like it's kind of tame. None of the deaths were actually that brutal or gory, but they have this guy, he's naked, they're holding him by his ankles, and they cut him in half from genitals to head. I'm like, this is like it just out of nowhere. Like nothing in this movie
Yeah.
gave any indication that this was going to happen. I'm like, "Nah, well,
It makes you a little uncomfortable. I remember being a kid, and then this is so tame now compared to like what we're talking about. But when I was just young, whenever the movie Ghost Ship came out, I don't know if you remember that movie.
I've seen Ghost Ship,
Um,
yeah.
but when it's the very beginning when they're all dancing and the wire, I guess, drops, and then the captain's face, like his whole body
Yeah.
just falls. I was like, as a kid, I was like, oh, that's rough. So,
And then
yeah,
nowadays you watch those Japanese films and there's no telling what's going to happen in
no,
those. That's
no.
But that leads into the next one, which is when it comes to horror films, what is one thing that always like grosses you out, kind of makes you cringe or look away?
As far as horror movies go, what I will look away from is any kind of like, and they play on this a lot in horror sometimes. I don't like to see animals get hurt. I can sit and watch all day long. Like, go ahead, take, a clothes, like anything and just beat somebody. That's fine. Put them in a
Yeah.
pillowcase, thrash them around. But it's like anytime like an animal comes into play, I'm like, oh no, I can't watch that. I can't watch that. Or like, like a baby. Sometimes that's a little uncomfortable. But as far as people and stuff, I know that sounds very desensitive, but it's a good time.
That's one of the
Watch.
things is like gore with adults. You see that in almost every horror film nowadays.
Yeah.
But for me, one of the things that always gets me is the limb distortion.
Yes. Like one that got me very good was Gerald's Game.
Yeah.
Whenever, yeah, the wrist, like the skin. Oh,
One of the big movies for me with that was Malignant.
yes.
Whenever
Gosh.
the brother took over and like he rotated her arms and legs around to run backwards, I'm like, no. Or
No.
it was like
Or
Legion
honestly, yes, that too.
when the ice cream man's arms started extending and he was
Just
cracking
like
them and twisting them around. I'm like, not
it's
for me.
rough.
That's
One scene, and it's a very old one, like, and I know most people, I mean, like, people probably don't really think about it, but one scene, like, as far as distortion goes, as far as that is concerned, and it's very tame, all things considered. It's in, I want to say, is it American Werewolf or something? Whenever he does that first werewolf transformation,
yeah, an
and
American Werewolf
he's
in
like
London.
like
Yep.
sweating and just like you see the bones cracking and he's turning into wolf form and it seems so painful. It's just like, oh, like
Yeah, I don't. I mean, I don't know what it is about it, but like when the limbs are
yeah.
like, or if somebody gets hit by a car and their
And they're
limbs are in
all
a
like,
weird angle,
yeah,
and then they just
yes,
start snapping them back in place. I'm like, no, that's.
yeah. That gets
I
me
don't
too.
know if it's the
That's
sound or the visual. It's just something
hmm
about it that I just
it seems so
cringe.
painful.
All
Yeah.
right, that brings us to the last one for tonight. Is your favorite horror actor or actress?
Well, with me loving The Exorcist, of course, I'm a huge like number one Linda Blair. I love her. But there's so many good ones. Like, and it kind of is a shame because like I have a lot of favorite female actresses that are great. You know, I really enjoyed, like I say, Linda Blair. I love, gosh, I wish I could think of her name right off the top of my head, but like the last girl in the Texas Chainsaw, we've got Nancy from Nightmare on Elm Street. I love that as far as like your last girls. But one thing I really enjoy as far as like characters go is just people that are kind of just not quite right in a way. Like, you know, like the twisted type characters that come in and you think they're nice, and then it's like you get a whole different narrative and it's wow. So I guess my favorite would have to be probably unfortunately down the female department. Like I love the basic last girls. I love Linda Blair. She's my favorite. Um, and just stuff like that, I guess. Like there's so many. Like I would if I had time I would sit and just think about it. But
No, for me, my favorite era of horror is always 60s and early 70s.
yeah,
Just because in like my favorite actor of all time is Vincent Price.
I
It's
love
just
Vincent
whether
Price.
he
He's
was
so
doing
iconic.
a comedy or like a Poe
Hmm.
rendition, he was phenomenal in everything he did. Like he never had a bad movie.
Yeah, House on Haunted Hill is one of my favorite
Yeah.
go to sleep movies. Like I will put that on just to have a relaxing day around the house.
And it's like on top of
So,
that, like his impact. Like one of my favorite
yeah.
artists is Alice Cooper.
Yeah,
And
mine too.
when you see him live, before he introduces Nita for her guitar solo for the Black Widow, he has that whole Vincent Price rendition played beforehand. I'm like,
Yeah.
I don't think that man ever made a bad movie. It just
No.
didn't happen.
No, he was such an icon. Like and like I say, anything you get to see him in from back in the day is a joy to watch. So,
And
I
it's like even back
completely
then, like in the 60s, they were putting out movies back to back to back. So he was in like 5 or 6 movies every year in the 60s.
yeah. He was absolutely like there were so many things that he did, just whether it was like voicing stuff or like overdubs or whatever. And he was going back to back, like you said. So
Like one of my favorite classic films is the Witchfinder General in 1970.
I haven't seen that.
And like he played one of the best bad guys I've ever seen. Like just the nonchalance of just back where it was like
Probably just
anything
being
could
like
any yeah,
scuzzy, just that
anything could
old
get you
like
classified as a witch, and he played into that really well with how like committing people to their execution and stuff like that for being into witchcraft. And it's just like it came naturally to him, but in real life
yeah.
he was the nicest person you could ever
He
meet.
seems like, and that's what I think that is one thing that makes people like him fantastic actors is when, you can't separate, like you see their characters on screen and you feel one type of way. And then, you listen to him like do an interview or something in person and you're like, oh, wow, that just shows like such a dynamic. And he was absolutely one of the best. He's one of my favorites too. So,
Now, I'm sure I had other questions planned for tonight, but for the life of me, I can't remember them. But hopefully, you had fun here tonight. Mindy had
yeah.
mentioned that this was your first interview regarding Is Something Burning, so I'm honored to be the first person that was able to sit down and interview about it. And hopefully, you had fun here tonight.
I did. It was such a good time to get to talk with you, and I really thank you for taking the time to meet with me and show your viewers what we're doing, and that means so much, and I really can't thank you enough.
And now that you've done it, you're kind of locked in. So when you release stuff in the future, we're gonna have to get you back on for another episode, give people an
Perfect.
update, and talk about some of the new stuff you got going on. But once again, let people know where they can find you if they're looking, and anything else if we've missed anything during the interview or whatnot that you want to bring up. Feel free to take that time now and say anything that we might have forgotten.
Yeah, just if anybody's ever interested or has questions, or even if you want to help, like if you have an idea and you're like, oh, well, I'd like to do movies or I want to get involved, I'm always looking for people that have a passion for it and want to take the time to even just learn. I'm very lenient towards schedules, obviously. So nobody ever has to feel like they have to make it their whole life. And if I can do anything to just inspire somebody or even like a kid or somebody that's just like, hey, I want to do something, I would love to share that with people so that they can experience how much fun it is as well. And if people want to get in touch with me to reach out, whether it's about projects or want to be part of it, YouTube, Facebook, TikTok for now. And I'm going to be working harder, like I say, in the future towards being very active on social media as far as posts and stuff like that goes. I'm always good at, replying to messages and stuff, but not the best at posting. So, but yeah, I mean, the only thing I could really say is that if anybody ever sees this and they're like, hey, I wish I could, get involved, please do. So,
Yeah, so make sure that you guys follow Rotten Moxie Productions. We'll make sure to post the social links in the comments on the YouTube and the Facebook. We're also going to upload to Spotify as the audio only version. That way, if easier for people that if they don't have time to sit and watch, they can just put it on in the background while they're doing stuff around the house or driving to work, stuff like that. So we'll make sure to put all the links down there. And Haley, once again, I appreciate you joining me. I had a lot of fun, and like I said, first episode of 2026. I I enjoyed it. Hopefully you did as well.
I did. I thank you so much. And it was a pleasure getting to talk with you. And I appreciate you for giving us a platform to share our work on. And what you do is fantastic. And I can't thank you enough. It was such a joy to get to come on here and just talk to you. And it was so much fun. So
Like I said, I was more than happy to help you, and like I said, we look forward to having you back on again in the future.
sounds good. I'll keep you updated. And like I say, if anybody ever is interested or wants to do stuff, just let us know. So I really thank you again.
Well, we appreciate it, and like I said, we'll be in touch.
Cool. Thanks.